All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the statewide training initiative with Florida Legal Services. But I'm kind of wearing a different hat today. Today, I'm here as a chair for the Professional Development Committee of the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar. We're excited to have you join us here today for this collaboration with the Animal Law section. So we have the Public Interest Law section, PILS, and the Animal Law section. So ALS, so I'm going to call us pals for this collaboration. And before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. It will be posted. The recording will be posted on the YouTube page for the Animal Law section. I'm going to drop the link for their YouTube page into the chat after I'm done with the intro. It will also go out via email from a Zoom email, and the training has been approved for CLE. I'll announce the CLE code towards the end of the call. It's been approved for one CLE credit, one criminal appellate law certification credit, and one criminal trial law certification credit. So I'll drop that link into the chat towards the end, and I'll announce it as well, and we'll include it in the YouTube description as well. And as I said, this training is part of a collaboration between the public interest law section of the Florida Bar and the animal law section. I'm gonna drop links for both sections into the chat, just in case you're not a member. If you want to learn about the work the sections do, we both do amazing work, and it's been great working with Ralph and the animal law section on this training series. We have another training, a follow-up training next week on fair housing, so be on the lookout for that one. And final piece of housekeeping announcements is questions and answers. You will notice that we have the Q&A feature. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, you can post them there. You can actually post them anonymously if you wanted to, and we will address all the questions towards the end. We have all these materials are going to be available, and I'm going to be sharing those with the audience as well. I'll drop them into the chat. So before I want to go ahead and introduce Ralph. I'm going to do a short bio, but you can read his full bio in the materials. Ralph has practiced law for 40 years, specializing in environmental, land use, administrative, constitutional, and animal law. He holds degrees from Stetson University and FSU Law and is recognized by Martin Del Hubble, Florida Super Lawyers, and Chambers USA. Active in the Florida Bar, he has shared multiple sections and theses as an adjunct professor. A published legal scholar and frequent speaker, he advises major news outlets and serves on local boards, including Tallahassee's Community Human Services Partnership and Animal Crimes Task Force. He represents corporations, individuals, and local governments. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to you, Ralph. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge, and I appreciate all of you participating in this, and we're very happy to partner with the Public Interest Law section. This is a topic that is very important to all of us. Some of what you're going to hear today is not easy to hear. That's what we deal with in animal law circles, but it's important to know. And so thank you so much. Feel free to post questions in the Q&A link, but we'll hold them till the end. And I'm going to ask Jorge to advance to the next slide. Yeah, I want to start with just a little bit of a background on animals and animal welfare. One of the things that some people find surprising, I did when I learned about this a few years ago, is how long Florida has actually regulated animals. As far back as 1889, we passed our first anti-cruelty statute. And I gave you a citation there to an article if you're interested. The law still provides in the key statute 828 that an animal is every living dumb creature. It's kind of an archaic term, but it remains in the law. Next, please. Florida has actually amended the Constitution several times to reflect animal welfare issues. One of the first was when the citizens voted to protect pregnant pigs. And it provides in the Florida Constitution that pregnant sows may only be confined in areas large enough for them to turn around freely, and it carries with it some pretty steep penalties. One of the amendments that's near and dear to my heart and others in the animal law section is we worked closely with the Humane Society of the United States, Grade 2K, and other animal welfare organizations as a section to help put Amendment 13 on the ballot. And it was approved by almost 70% of the voters, thereby permanently doing away with commercial greyhound racing. And one of the aspects of this that we in the section are particularly proud of is that we focused on this statement here that was in the amendment and that the Florida Supreme Court picked up in its opinion that said that the humane treatment of animals is a fundamental value of the people of the state of Florida. Again, a very, very significant statement there that's in the law today. I gave you the citation there to the statute that defines cruelty to animals. I'll let you read it later when you look at the materials. Next, please. Okay, well, I'm just going to highlight some of the aspects of the law that applies here. It's an extensive law. It's been there for decades. It gets amended from time to time, but it provides for misdemeanor and felony penalties for animal abuse and neglect. Cruelty is defined basically as overloading, overdriving, or tormenting, depriving of food, water, or shelter, mutilating, or killing in a cruel manner. And as you can see, just for a misdemeanor, there are penalties up to 1 year in prison and a fine of $1,000. There's also a third-degree felony for intentionally causing an animal's cruel death or to experience excessive or reactive infliction of unnecessary pain or suffering. And the penalties there up to 5 years in prison and a maximum fine of $5,000. And it goes from there. Next, please. Okay, now this is an important concept to understand, but sadly it is not well understood in the legal community, or frankly, in our experience, even among the prosecutors or the judges. Felony animal cruelty is a general intent crime. And what that means for you non-criminal lawyers, you just have to prove intent to commit an act that resulted in a cruel death, not an intent to cause the cruel death. And one of the defenses that defendants often use in these prosecutions is, well, I didn't, intend to hurt the animal, or I didn't intend to cause it a cruel death. Well, that's not the standard. The standard is that you had the intent to commit the act, and if the result was a cruel death, that violates the criminal code. And there's not a lot of case law because there haven't been a lot of cases that have resulted in reported appellate opinions, but there's a few out there. Hines v. State from the 5th DCA 2013 is one of them. Still good law to this day. It holds that where a dog was found dead in the defendant's apartment and the veterinarian testified that it was due to a lack of sustenance, federal felony animal cruelty conviction was proper. And these words of the judge are very significant. In other words, it is a misdemeanor to fail to feed a dog under the circumstances. It's a felony to starve a dog to death, deprive it of sustenance to the point where, like Pepsi, which was the name of the dog, it has no muscle mass and is too weak even to stand. There's also in the law that a felony is proper to be charged when you can show there's repeated actions. So if a dog is so malnourished that you can show it had to have been starved over a period of time, a felony charge would be appropriate. And then also a failure to act, such as not feeding the dog, could be construed as an act under the statute. Okay, next, please. Now, this gets into some of the more disturbing facts, but it's important to know about this. This data is a couple years old. I believe it's probably even worse than this, and this is going to have us transition in a few minutes to the link between animal cruelty and cruelty to human animals. 5% of animal abuse cases involve dogs. Unfortunately, there's no federal cruelty law, so we're talking about state laws for the most part for criminal code and local government ordinances for civil violations. There are some very significant exclusions from the animal cruelty laws. Sorry for the, looks like something got overtyped. One of the most significant exclusions and one of the areas where some of the most severe abuse takes place is animal testing. And these stats are probably low, but what we know about from recent data is about 66,000 dogs and 21,000 cats, oops, are subject to cruelty. Jorge, the picture went out. I don't see the,
Yep. I'll fix it in a second.
hang on. Yeah, I've got the hard copy here, but I'll wait a minute.
Let's see what's happening.
It's a beautiful vista of the mountains.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and reshare. Slideshow.
Hence my love-hate relationship with technology.
Yeah. And there we go. Share screen again. And I'll just catch up to your slide.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you can go to the next one, please. All right, now let's start talking about the legal status of animals. I think most people know this, but many do not. You know, everyone views their pets for the most part as family members, but under long-standing law, and this is true in most states, if not all states, pets are considered no different than any personal property, and that's been established by court orders. Like all personal property, even in a dissolution of a marriage, they're subject to equitable distribution no differently than any other personal property. So what I tell my law students is that their beloved pet dog or cat or bird or whatever has no greater legal status than the desk that they're sitting at, the chair they're sitting on, their computer, or their cell phone. And that is very surprising to some people to hear that, but that's the state of the law. And that has significance when we talk about some of these prosecutions. I'll get into that more in a minute. Next, please. Now, you know, we like to talk about ethical considerations in these programs. A former prosecutor from Alachua County shared this with me. I've been involved in several of these cases, and it is a real challenge sometimes, depending on what district or circuit you're in, to relay to law enforcement, to the prosecutors, and to the courts the considerations that they need to have when they're looking at animal cruelty cases. And there are some excellent people in the field. I've worked very successfully here locally with the Tallahassee Animal Services animal control officers, with Tallahassee Police Department, Leon County sheriffs, and the state attorney, and with the local judges. But what I have noticed over the years is that there really is a lack of full understanding of these types of cases and why they need to be taken as seriously as cases against the human animal. And again, we're going to talk about that more in a minute. It's important that these cases be prosecuted vigorously. Sadly, they frequently are not. The victims are real, and the victims can be human and non-human animals. They really have no voice or recourse other than that which we provide to them. And it might seem, you know, self-evident, but, you know, we're typically bigger and stronger than these pets. It's a form of bullying. I recognize that in the law, we don't consider bullying an animal to be inappropriate because it's not a human animal. So the bullying laws per se don't apply. As I said, it's only personal property. I guess you can't bully your car, right? But it's still bullying by any other definition. And something that's abusive is abusive regardless of whether it's to an animal, a non-human animal, or a human animal. And it leads to other abuses, which we're going to talk about. Now, I found this surprising when it was shared with me. I would have thought that those top two categories would have been a higher percentage of the offenses that we've seen, but only 5% are from mentally ill or sadistic people. About 25% are from sociopathic people. The majority of these cases are ignorance or stupidity, frankly. One of the things that we're proud of in Tallahassee is for about 15 years now or more, we've had a Tallahassee uh, responsible pet ownership course that was approved by the city commission and is in fact written into the Tallahassee Code of Ordinances. And if you get a civil citation for violating the animal code, you have an option to check a box, much like you can if you get a traffic ticket, to take our course. And if you take the course, which is offered 2 or 3 times a year, and you pass a test, we will only fine you a reduced fine and it won't go on your record. And it's been a very successful program. If you could, can you scroll down to the bottom there a little bit? Or is that okay?
It's cut
Anyway,
off there.
yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to read, but let me real quick go to my hard copy because these are important concepts here. Um, when our advice to prosecutors, and I've participated in a lot of programs with prosecutors, they have to recognize in the context of animal cruelty prosecutions the same considerations that you would have in a human animal prosecution. Punishment is certainly at the top of the list. Prevention that goes with punishment is also one of the significant motivators that has to be considered. But then education, educating them as to why what they did was wrong. I can tell you the hundreds of people that we have processed through our responsible pet ownership class, 90% of them, and I teach that and other people in our section teach it, 90% of them don't realize what they're doing is wrong. They don't fully appreciate why you can't leave a dog in a hot car even with the windows rolled down in the summer in Florida. They think, well, they got plenty of air. Well, that's not true. They don't appreciate why it's important to have good shelter and good fresh water or feed a dog dog food, not cat food. It's really kind of astonishing, but the good news about that is they can be educated, and that's part of our goals. And then ultimately, of course, saving the animals is our goal. Next, please. Okay, well, now I want to transition more to understanding animal psychology, if you will, but then segue into the relationship between animals, I'm sorry, and people. There have been extensive studies, only some of them are cited here, that show that animals, dogs, cats, horses, I'm a horse owner and horse lover, have cognitive capacities far greater than we understand. Now, this is one of my favorite sites that this study showed that dogs have an understanding of fairness and a lack of equity. And I always like to joke that my cruelty rescue border collie from the Tallahassee Animal Service Center gives me that's not fair look if I don't give him enough food, in his opinion, if I don't give him a treat, or if I show too much attention to my cat. I mean, I'm telling you, it's a lack of fairness, he would say. If he could talk in human language, that's what he would be saying. The other thing that I found interesting is this University of British Columbia study said that dogs are smarter in terms of traditional testing of intelligence than many human 2-year-olds in terms of vocabulary and basic math skills. Fascinating, huh? So the point of that is that we've got to take more seriously the fact that animals are smart enough to understand what's going on with them, what we're doing or not doing to properly care for them because they are vulnerable and they count on us to take care of them. Next, please. Okay, well, now let's talk more about the kind of focus of this presentation, and that's the human-animal psychological connection. And some of this, again, is disturbing, but it's important to understand, okay? It is a well-settled proposition, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise, that animal abuse has been consistently linked with other violent criminal behaviors, okay? Uh, if you look at serial killers or mass murderers of human animals, you will find in most cases that they started out abusing, injuring, or killing family pets or neighborhood animals. It's a fact. The other thing that is a fact is that pet abuse is one of the 4 indicators of domestic partner abuse. Again, there are, psychologists and law enforcement, prosecutors, judges use this as an indicator. So if you're abusing a pet, the probability is that you are probably going to, at some point, abuse a domestic human partner. The other thing that is now a fact and truth, scientifically proven, the link between childhood animal cruelty and tolerance for interpersonal violence as adults. Again, we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but it's a one-to-one correlation. In the overwhelming majority of cases, if a person was either themselves the perpetrator of childhood animal cruelty, or they observed it by a parent or a relative or a friend, they tend to be desensitized to interpersonal violence as adults. This is a disturbing but fascinating statistic. And again, I know it comes from '83, but it is still accurate today. In families investigated for child abuse, 60% revealed pet abuse. Again, proving the human-animal psychological connection. And this one is particularly disturbing and unfortunate. Children in 88% of homes with prosecutable animal cruelty report having been abused themselves. Okay, so you just cannot separate, not at least scientifically, the human-animal psychological connection and the well-established connection between animal abuse and human violence towards humans. Next. I have some friends that work at the FDLE here in Tallahassee, one of whom works on serial killer cases. And I said, "Is this true?" It's shocking. And she said, "Yeah, it absolutely is true." The largest single survey to date of serial killers found that 36% admitted to committing animal cruelty as children. 46% admitted to committing animal cruelty as adolescents, and 36% admitted to committing animal cruelty as adults. Again, this is somewhat astonishing if you're not aware of it, but it's extremely disturbing. Over a third of serial killers admitted to committing animal cruelty as children, adolescents, or adults. Again, demonstrating the connection here, and that'll become even more relevant in a few minutes. Okay, next. Continuing with the theme of the prevalence of domestic violence in our society, domestic violence is the most common cause of non-fatal injury to women in the United States. The risk of death from domestic violence is also substantial. 1/3 of all homicides of women in the United States are committed by a spouse or partner. And this is where it comes closer to home for the topic today. 71 to 83% of women entering domestic violence shelters report that their partners abused or killed the family pet. That is a fairly astonishing statistic and shows the point that we're making here in this presentation. According to the Humane Society of the United States, in a 1997 study, and this remains valid today, of 50 of the largest shelters for battered women in the United States, they found that 85% of women and 63% of children entering these shelters discussed incidents of pet abuse in the family. It goes on to say that batterers who abuse their pets are both more controlling and use more dangerous forms of violence, such as sexual violence, rape, emotional violence, and stalking, than batterers who do not. If you are interested in learning more, I urge you to take a look at the Journal of Interpersonal Violence and the article that I cited there. Okay, next, please. This is a particularly revealing study. A 1983 survey in New Jersey of 53 families reported for child abuse found that 60% of the families, in 60% of the families, at least one person had abused animals. The study also found that in 2/3 of these cases, the abusive parent had injured or killed a pet, and in 1/3 of them, children were the animal abusers. Again, this is important to understand and internalize for many reasons, not the least of which is to look for the warning signs, because they're there if you look for them. Next, please. Okay, well, with that background and demonstrated connection between animal abuse and abuse of non-human animals, of non-human animals and human animals, let's focus in on some of the specific laws that exist in Florida, okay? Florida legally defines domestic violence as any assault, aggravated assault, battery, aggravated battery, sexual assault, sexual battery, stalking, aggravated stalking, kidnapping, false imprisonment, or any criminal offense resulting in physical injury or death of one family household member by another family or household member. Now, let me pause there for a minute and come back to what I said in the beginning here. Very obviously omitted from this is any reference to an animal, a non-human animal, right? The assault that is referred to here, the offenses that are referred to here relate to a family member or a household member. And as I mentioned earlier, by definition, an animal, even though we feel that they are members of our family, is not considered a family member because it's not a human animal, okay? So that gets back to the fact that the laws to this day do not consider animals to be persons or to have the same status as a human animal. Rather, they are considered no different than any other personal property. Now, domestic violence can happen to anyone, anytime, and in all kinds of families and relationships. Most of it, however, is committed by men and women, by men, and women are 5 times more likely than men to be victimized by an intimate partner. There's something in the psychology of men and women that results in this fact. Abusers and victims, the survivors included, represent all ages, races, religions, cultures, genders, sexual orientations, marital status, and economic status. The violence abusers perpetuate is a public health concern affecting workplaces, healthcare, educational systems, social services, child welfare, and the criminal justice system. And let me pause there again. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never met or spoken to a person who didn't know by personal experience or by association an incident of domestic violence in one or more of these various forms. It is a sad fact of life in our country and other countries, and it has obvious significance in the context of violence against non-human animals as well. Okay, moving on. Abusers cause harm to their children who may see or hear the abuse being committed or directly experience the harm, injury, or abuse that is intentional, inadvertent, or during a child's attempt to protect the non-abusive parent or caregiver who's being abused. Children may show signs of trauma, such as higher levels of aggressive behavior, depression, and anxiety, difficulty getting along with others, and difficulty performing well in school. Not all child observers of domestic violence become batterers or tolerate abuse. Children react to their environment in different ways, and age and gender are considerations in how a child is affected by the violence. The potential to heal from the effects of the abuse and enhance a family's resilience and well-being comes from supporting the safety and well-being of the non-abusive parent or caregiver. That is a very significant point here. I'm going to say it again. The potential to heal from the effects of the abuse and enhance a family's resilience and well-being comes from supporting the safety and well-being of the non-abusive parent or caregiver. That's why, for example, safe houses are so important. We have some in Tallahassee. Frankly, we don't have enough. And now they will allow family pets into the safe houses in most cases, which is hugely significant because it's been demonstrated that if you can't bring your family pet and you are escaping a domestic violence situation, you often will remain in that violent situation. This has come up in other contexts that are analogous, such as during hurricanes. For many years, you couldn't bring a pet to a shelter. Well, now you can do that during a storm like a hurricane. So it's the same concept here, although of even greater concern. If a wife, for example, is trying to escape from a domestic violence situation where she is being assaulted or battered, etc., as defined, she needs to get out of that situation, and she needs a safe, accessible place to go. And if, as in most cases, they have family pets, they need to be able to take their pet with them. Okay, next, please. All right, well, now let's focus in on the specific Florida law that relates to domestic violence. And there have been some changes in recent years, I'm happy to say, in the context of animal abuse and the connection between animal abuse and domestic violence to a non-human animal. So let's talk, and this comes from the 741.28 Florida statutes, and the source, as you see there, is the Florida DCF. I gave you the citation to the site, the link. Check that out if you're interested in learning more. But let's talk about is what is happening considered abuse? Okay, a very important question, questions that law enforcement, prosecutors, judges have to contend with in these cases. Here are the key questions. Does your partner prevent you from seeing your family or friends? Now you might pause there and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem particularly violent. It is a form of abuse, okay? And a lot of people have experienced it. It doesn't really matter what the reason. Well, your mother-in-law is crazy or whatever. If your partner is preventing you from seeing your family and friends, and obviously you wish to see them, then that is a form of abuse. Does your partner show extreme jealousy towards your friends? Again, these are common phenomena, but in fact, that is considered when evaluating whether to charge or prosecute or convict a charge of domestic violence. That is a question that is asked. Next one, does your partner constantly criticize you and your abilities? Well, he who has not been the recipient or even the giver of that, can throw the first stone. But the fact is that constant criticism, not the occasional comment, but the constant criticism of the person or their abilities is an indicator, okay? An indicator of abuse, and it's one way that abusers act to maintain power and control over their partner. Does your partner intimidate or threaten you? Again, very, very common, seen by reports of people in safe houses and shelters. That is an indicator of abuse and can lead to domestic violence. Now, this next one, of course, is obvious. Does your partner hit, punch, slap, or kick you? Let me tell you what, that is never, ever appropriate behavior, no matter what the circumstance. It is, exhibit A of abuse that is considered legally domestic violence. Now, here's some that maybe you hadn't thought about. If you have a gun, has your partner ever threatened to use it? Happens more often than people realize. Because of Florida's lax gun laws, there are millions of guns that are out there. If your partner has ever threatened to go grab the pistol or shotgun and use it against you, that is a form of abuse and could be charged as domestic violence. This one is very common. Has your partner ever prevented you from leaving the house, getting a job, or continuing your education? You may not consider that to be a form of abuse or domestic violence or leading to it, but it is. Again, these are things that the DCF and other organizations look at when they're trying to evaluate whether or not domestic violence that rises to the level of a criminal violation exists. This one, has your partner ever destroyed things that you cared about? You know, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that, maybe to varying degrees, but if you have a beloved toy or car or whatever object and your partner knows it and they destroyed it, basically just to be mean, to get even with you, to punish you, to control you, that is a form of abuse and could be chargeable as domestic violence. Has your partner ever forced you to have sex or to engage in sex that makes you feel uncomfortable? Very controversial topic, very not well understood, but in fact, a spouse can be held for rape against another spouse. Just say no applies even in a marital relationship. And the last one on this list, just to be aware of, health and support are available if you are concerned and want to contact an advocate who will listen and connect you to resources in your community at your request. Now, let me pause there before we go on to the next couple of slides. Again, you will see, absent from this list of indicators of abuse that could lead to domestic violence and criminal charges, is any real reference to intimidating, injuring, threatening a family pet, okay? Now, I guess in a technical sense, it's a form of injury or threatened injury to property, right? But, or has your partner ever destroyed things that you care about if the partner's injuring an animal, but it isn't at least a delineated, on the delineation of objective criteria, it is not indicated. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Again, this comes from 741.30. And let me pause by saying, for many, many years, for many legislative sessions, the animal law section, which is authorized to lobby the legislature on particular issues, and other groups, Humane Society of the United States and others, have been trying, and I think will continue to try, to amend the domestic violence code and definition to include violence against a family pet. What we specifically asked to do, we asked the court, the legislature to do, was include in the definition of domestic violence, violence to a family pet. We were not able to get quite that far. There were some changes made that I'll talk about in a minute, but let me give a little background on this because it's of utmost importance. We weren't able to get quite that far because of a lot of factors, the usual politicking that goes on in Tallahassee, of course, finding sponsors who will make the bill a priority because they're limited in the bills that they can promote, getting leadership to get behind it. We got pretty far during a couple of sessions, and frankly, the criminal defense bar was also a little concerned about adding a specific offense. And let me pause there again. One of the arguments that was made was, well, we already have animal cruelty laws that will protect the animal. And the response we gave to that was, well, but we don't have laws that specifically protect the victim, the human victim, from threats or actual aggressive action towards the non-human animal. So that's why it is necessary to do that. So after many years, as I said, just a few years ago, there were some significant changes, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the time remaining. So again, 741.306B4, upon notice and hearing, when it appears to the court that the petitioner is either the victim of domestic violence as defined by 741.28, which we talked about a few minutes ago, or has reasonable cause to believe he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim of domestic violence, the court may grant such relief as the court deems proper, including an injunction. In determining whether a petitioner has reasonable cause to believe he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim of domestic violence, the court shall consider and evaluate all relevant factors alleged in the petition, including but not limited to, and this is what is significant here. Number one, the history between the petitioner and the respondent, including threats, harassment, stalking, and physical abuse, which, as we said earlier, is an indicator of domestic violence. Whether the respondent has attempted to harm the petitioner or family members or individuals closely associated with the petitioner. Again, attempt to harm the petitioner or family members or individuals closely associated is one of the indicators from the Department of Children and Families and children and adult psychologists who specialize in this of abuse and domestic violence. The third one, again, kind of self-evident, whether the respondent has threatened to conceal, kidnap, or harm the petitioner's child or children. Sadly, this is one of the most common forms of domestic violence. And again, under the statute, it says that the court will consider, among other factors, in determining whether a petitioner has reasonable cause to believe he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim, whether there's been a threat to conceal, kidnap, or harm the petitioner's child or children. And then the last one that was only relatively recently added to the law, whether the respondent has intentionally injured or killed a family pet. Very significant for all the reasons that we've been discussing, but you might say, well, why isn't that enough? That is not quite as strong, pardon the pun, but doesn't have the same teeth in it as making it specifically part of the definition of domestic violence that we reviewed earlier to say violence or threatened violence against a family pet, whether to intentionally injure or kill them. And the word intentionally is a bit troublesome too. Now I understand this is the criminal code, but let's go back to what we said earlier when we talked about general intent. Animal cruelty under the cruelty statutes is a general intent crime. You don't have to plead or prove, and a conviction is not dependent upon a finding that the respondent, the perpetrator, intended serious harm or death to that animal. But in this context of whether there's reasonable cause that a court can consider in a petition is whether the respondent has intentionally injured or killed. And this gives, frankly, the defense lawyers a lot of leeway here, and it's often determinative whether or not a charge is brought to begin with and whether or not a conviction can be obtained. And unfortunately, there are exceptions in a lot of circuits around the state, but unfortunately, there are not a lot of charges, prosecutions, or convictions brought under this statute. Now, it's a relatively new one, and we're all still learning about it, but it does at least have some teeth in it, if you will, but it doesn't go quite as far as we would like it to. Okay, well, let's go to the last substantive slide, please. Okay, this is very, very important to know as well. And I gave you at the bottom the link to where this comes from. In Florida, a court must consider whether a respondent has intentionally injured or killed a family pet in determining whether the petitioner has reasonable cause to believe he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim of domestic violence. And there's the statute, the citation to 741.306B4. Let me pause there again. in order for the court, part of the consideration for a court, a judge, to determine whether a respondent has intentionally injured or killed a family pet as a foundation for determining whether the petitioner has reasonable cause to believe he or she is in imminent danger of becoming a victim of domestic violence really depends on the concept, as we just discussed, of whether the respondent has intentionally injured or killed a family pet, okay? And I've given you the citation there to the Supreme Court approved family law form that you would use in these kinds of cases to bring these kinds of cases. And it is good that we have some protection. I would say it's half a loaf. It doesn't go quite far enough for the reasons I just discussed, because if you can't allege credibly and ultimately prove that the respondent, the perpetrator of the alleged domestic violence, has intentionally injured or killed the family pet as a form of retribution, threat, control over the other person, most commonly the woman, you're not going to get either a charge to be brought initially, a prosecution that goes to court, or a judge issuing an order that protects the victim here. And again, this is why we keep saying we don't think it goes far enough. This is why we continue to argue for strengthening these domestic relations laws. But it is helpful in the process. But as I said earlier, we're not seeing a lot of protective orders entered on the basis of this. The last thing I want to talk about substantively, and then we'll take some questions, is subsection 741.305A4 authorizes the court, when issuing an ex parte temporary injunction for protection against domestic violence, to award petitioner temporary exclusive care, possession, and control of an animal that is owned, possessed, harbored, or kept by petitioner respondent or a minor child residing in petitioner's or respondent's residence or household. Again, very helpful. It gives the court that authority to issue this temporary injunction to protect the animal. The court may order the respondent to temporarily have no contact with the animal and may enjoin the respondent from taking, transferring, concealing, harming, or otherwise disposing of the animal. Now, we find that, among the animal law practitioners and animal welfare advocates, such as we are in the animal law section, a helpful statute. Again, it's a relatively recent one. I'm not aware that, as I said before, that there's been extensive action under this section of the statute, but it's there. And this gets back to kind of what I want to close on before we take any questions. The practicalities, okay? As was mentioned in the beginning by Jorge, I serve on the City of Tallahassee's Animal Crimes Task Force. It was formed about 10 years ago by the City Commission. It's composed of lawyers, private sector people, animal welfare advocates, representatives of Tallahassee Animal Control, Sheriff's Office, and Tallahassee Police Department, and State Attorney and Office of the Mayor. I can tell you from having served on that from its inception, these are caring, well-intentioned people that really try to do the job of trying to protect animals, but also, as there's increasing awareness of what we've just been talking about, the need to protect humans as well from threats or actions against the family pet or other animals. And that's great. And we talk about it all the time. We put on, educational programs and produce humane educational materials. I mentioned the responsible pet ownership class. But unfortunately, the reality is that a very small fraction of animal cruelty cases, and even cases against human animals, so to speak, for domestic relations violations, very few of them get actually charged or prosecuted. And this is a function of a lot of different things. These are not easy cases to bring. I have sympathy in that regard for the law enforcement and courts and prosecutors because the resources are limited. And if they don't feel that they have a likelihood, and I believe that's kind of the standard they use of prevailing, they're not going to bring the case. And unfortunately, that means that the perpetrator gets away with it. Now, I think there has been, as I said, increasing awareness of the reason to protect animals is also to protect the human animal, but it hasn't quite taken a foothold. Now, I asked a state attorney once, who cared about animals and when presented with a prosecutable offense that was likely to be successful, why they don't prosecute more than a small percentage. I'm talking about like 10%, maybe 20% in a given year. He said, Ralph, I would love to. I agree with you. It's a problem. Go get me more resources, he said. Go to the legislature. Give me more money for more detectives, more investigators, more assistant state attorneys, because we don't have the resources to prosecute human on human animal crimes. And we have to turn down many of these, not to mention property crimes. So unfortunately, just as a practical reality that we have to deal with as animal welfare advocates, most of the reports do not go prosecuted. And so that's sad and unfortunate. It's a reality we deal with. State resources are limited, local government resources are limited. I'm very sympathetic to that, and I hear a lot from people that say, well, they just don't care. I can tell you from personal experience, I don't believe it's true that they don't care. I do think it's a function of resources. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it's also a function of education for them to understand better what the laws are. And then ultimately, last point I'll make is the judges are where the proverbial prosecutorial rubber meets the road. If the judges aren't willing to convict, if the judges don't have a full appreciation, and look, most judges, when they went to law school, there weren't animal law classes like I teach at FSU Law and Stetson Law. They kind of need to be guided. And unfortunately, most lawyers, and I can count on one hand in Tallahassee alone, the number of lawyers that actually are qualified, in my opinion, to bring prosecutions. I've assisted the city of Tallahassee before in these things. And it's just really a challenge to get people that understand the laws. We actually, the animal law section, my local charity, Pets Ad Litem, and the Animal Crimes Task Force co-sponsored a couple of judicial training programs. And every time we do it, I've had multiple judges come up to me and say, wow, I wish I knew that before I handled, Jones v. Smith, because I didn't know that, and that's very helpful. So we're continuing with outreach. As I mentioned earlier, education is a huge part of trying to be successful in this arena. Okay, well, we've got just a few minutes left here. Jorge, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. So let me start reading them out loud. I'm actually gonna drop into the chat. I'm gonna drop the CLE code just in case. I'm gonna read it out loud because I know everybody will ask. It's 8868. I'm gonna drop it into the chat right now. It will be in the materials as well. Just wanted to get that out of the way before I started with the reading out the questions and that we
Thank you.
saw posted. So let me pull them up. I'm gonna read them out in order as they came in. So this one, let me know if you want me to go back to the cruelty slide. I will go back as soon as I read it, just in case it's related to it. So the question is, this may be a bit outside of the scope of this seminar, but at what point, if ever, is ownership of animals by homeless persons considered cruelty or abuse?
It's not considered cruelty or abuse per se. Homeless people have the same right to own animals, but they also are subject to the same cruelty law. So if there's evidence that a homeless person is not properly caring for their pet, which sometimes it's obvious visually, emaciated, you know, tongue hanging out in the heat, not given proper shelter. But I can tell you, and this is not a scientific survey, but I've actually observed some pets owned by homeless people look to be in better shape than a lot of pets owned by people that are not homeless.
Right. So the next, it's more of a comment than a question. It does say the dog cat food caught my attention. Our daughter just took a job at the Pet Food Institute in DC.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. They have different dietary needs. Consult with your veterinarian.
All right. The next question is the success of filing a complaint affected when two people are not married and the petitioner accidentally files in family court when instead they should have filed under the domestic violence provision? Is there any difference?
Yeah, I think it's best to go under the specific statutes that relate to the specific alleged crime. I mean, eventually you'll get there, but it would be better to do it, more in keeping with the statute.
So here's a question that I had, so I'm glad it was posted here. So say in the injunction that the respondent did intentionally kill or injure a family pet, and that was proven during the injunction hearing, would it then be able to be forwarded or referred to the state attorney's office for animal abuse charges?
Let me put it this way. It should be if all of those criteria are met, and that would be a more likely scenario for an actual prosecution. But you heard what I said earlier about lack of resources and proof problems.
And this question could not be more timely since we're in legislative session right now. So, what are some proposed laws you'd like to see combat deviant animal cruelty offenses? Any pending bills that we should be looking at?
Yeah, we've been monitoring a number of bills and we do lobby some of the bills in the legislature. Unfortunately, if there are 5 or 6 bills that get filed, maybe one, if we're fortunate, or two get through the system for all the reasons I said. And as I mentioned, Florida has a pretty good track record of protecting animals, but it is difficult to get legislators, even if they are well-meaning and love their animals, to focus on these as priorities. We are constantly trying to strengthen the penalties. We've had some success for chargeable offenses involving animal cruelty. We've tried to impose some better controls on things like prohibiting, there's been an effort in Tallahassee the last few years to preempt local laws that prohibit the sale of uh, puppy and kitten mill animals through animal pet shops, right? And there's, I don't know, 60 or 70 local governments that prohibit that. Those animals typically are in terrible shape, they're sick, and they often don't make it. That's a form of animal cruelty, by the way, that tends to go unprosecuted. We've strengthened laws for first responders, canines, allowing them to be put in an ambulance, which up until a few years ago, if they were injured in the line of duty, allowing them to be using the drugs that save them from overdoses, drug sniffing dogs. So there are a number of things, but I would say if you have an interest, that's great. Monitor it and get with your local legislators or lobbyists, work with organizations like the Humane Society of the United States and others, and stay on top of it because I do think we've had some successes.
We have two more questions. What if the animals are owned by homeless drug users or persons arrested for selling drugs? I guess in general, somebody gets arrested.
Yeah, I mean, the animal would likely be confiscated in Tallahassee or Leon County. It would be brought to the animal shelter. They do a good job at the animal shelter of evaluating the adoptability of the animal. If the person is released, then they can probably get it back. It depends. At least the animal would get some attention, would be microchipped, would be spay or neutered. But yeah, I mean, in the case of a crime that's being committed, you don't per se lose your civil rights. Let me mention one more thing I should have mentioned earlier. Tallahassee a few years ago enacted an animal abuse registry. Go on talgov.com and go to the link on the animal shelter, animal service center pet abuser registry. It works very much like a child or a domestic abuser registry. And some of it's pretty horrifying, but it has had a bit of a chilling effect. And while we couldn't prohibit private adoptions or purchases of animals for people on the registry, we can prohibit the animal shelter from adopting out to them. And it's a pretty effective deterrent.
All right. And we have one last question. We're right at time. What can be done to protect Muscovy ducks from abuse. They are considered pests, but it seems animal abuse terminating is against the law.
That's a great question. Uh, there are federal endangered species laws. We have some state protected species laws managed by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They sadly do not go far enough. It's one of the reasons why we've seen a extraordinarily tragic die-off of manatees. But I would suggest you direct that to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
All right, so we're right at time. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. On behalf of the Public Interest Law section and the Animal Law section of the Florida Bar, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to our speaker, Ralph. Amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing your expertise for this critical intersection of domestic violence and animal abuse. Your insights into, the legal and emotional challenges faced by survivors and looking at these legislative efforts as well, they have been invaluable. So we wanted to thank everybody involved here, Gabriel, Ben, for helping putting this webinar together. I know we had some technical hiccups when we first tried it, so I'm glad we did it over. We had a do-over because it was great. Be on the lookout for the follow-up webinar on fair housing and emotional support animals, which is deeply connected to this topic as well. That's gonna go out via email as well on how to register and join for that webinar. So Ralph, thank you again, and thank you everybody for joining. The CLE code is 8868. And Ralph, any closing statements before we wrap up?
Yes, thank you again, everyone, for helping organize and participate. Join the animal law section and the public interest law section if you have any interest in these issues. They're great groups.
All right, and I'm seeing a lot of thank yous here in the chat. So thank you everybody. Have a great day. Bye bye.